Hello, everybody. It is time for another EdenOnEOS Chief Delegate meeting. Today is February 3rd. I don't know, what meeting is this now? 15?
16.
16. Sweet 16. We're going to cover lots of great stuff today. It'll be sweet. So first thing is updates. And we don't have John today. He is down under. Full of jokes. Jesse, you can go first with updates if you'd like.
All right. Hey, guys. So it's been a busy week for us because at the end of the month, we got all the data from our hives. So all the hives, we just started our 2.0 model in January, and they were all keeping track of every single work item was tracked. They put a value in EOS for that item, the link submitted, the transaction hash. And so we got all that data. And so we just learned a lot about how the new model is working compared to the old one. And so we're coming out with a report next week. Going to be like a lot of stuff in there, and it's like too much to explain now, but I'll just give you one stat that I found interesting. So now this is across all the hives. There were 8 funded hives in January, and this is going to be the amount of funds spent by contest type. So the types we have are translation, article, video, podcast, graphic 2D, social media post, offline event, miscellaneous task, or business development task. And so across all the hives, 23.8% was spent on translations, 7.5% on articles, 18% on video, 2.6% on podcasts, 1.8% on graphic 2D, almost 20% on social media posts, 1.5% on an offline event. We just had one of those in the Vietnamese hive, 2.8% on miscellaneous tasks, and the business development task 5.5%. And so social media posts and translations were the highest spent. Those are like unsophisticated tasks. And the other thing I'll share is that we had a point system. And so for each work item was associated with a certain amount of points. And the hives had a competition. So, and the points don't directly correspond to more EOS, just if you won the competition, you got a little bonus. Second place got a slightly smaller bonus than the first place. And so congratulations to the Vietnamese hive. They won the contest. Second place was the French hive. Third place, Korean hive. Fourth place, Turkish hive, Spanish hive, English hive, Hindi hive. And so, yeah. And so, yeah, look forward to our report coming out next month. Going to be a lot of cool stuff in there. And yeah, just excited to kind of see feedback when that comes out.
It's how big, like how many members do you have now as a part of your colony?
We have a little more than 150 right now.
That's wild. Good for you. Cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Good update. Okay, I'll go across my screen. So I'm next. I have been working on the same project for a while. That's going to be coming out soon with a full. So it's officially going to be including an Eden process as part of its DAO membership to select basically the leadership in the committee that this DAO is going to use. It's tied to governance on EOS and block producers and kind of how that all works. So that should be, it's really cool. It's coming together, I think 2 weeks or so. It'll be live and it'll be out there, so I can talk more about it. So that's been a main focus from the Eden point of view. I've also been running the idea past the Telos Foundation on basically bringing this process and this community and the structure over to the Telos ecosystem. And so we'll see what that looks like. It's obviously going to be a long process, but they're open to it. It's all, again, it's about just another way to do democracy and select leaders and representatives and solve for trusted individuals. And then maybe in that community, what I think will be useful, what will be interesting is we can be a little more deliberate about what exactly elections are solving for, where here we're solving for trusted stewards of community funding, which is kind of broad, right? I think we've all kind of accepted that it's not, it's a bit ambiguous, sort of, where I think in this case, we can kind of start it off from ground zero with a really pointed and deliberate purpose. So I think that's pretty exciting. I know there's still a bit of tribalism amongst these communities, but I think that's slowly going away. And we're recognizing that we're stronger together. And those who are in Eden, because they love this idea of how it's democracy done differently, should be hopefully pretty excited about that we get another iteration. That anyway, it's a long way to go. I still have to get people and try to do a worker proposal and get funding and blah, blah, blah. But at least there's some pretty good openness to this process to bring it over. So yeah, that's my update in a nutshell. Randall?
So for EOS support, we were interviewed by Bywire. So those who did not see it, check it out. It's an interesting video. So
he really hit you with the tough questions there.
Yeah,
those are some interesting questions he asked you.
You did great.
I thought I was being interviewed to be the president of the United States. Yeah, so that was good. And the second thing is, you know, we've been working very hard to start recruiting and to educate and to get people ready to help the network in a meaningful way. So we are working on that as well. Development is also going on so that we can really make EU support a true DAO or DAC in the future. So we are really building the platform. And also, I think I came into agreement with Jesse on how much we will take for our next development, the collaboration that Support and the Bees are working on, how much we will take after Palmello is completed, and then we will deliver on the referral system that will help with a way to hold the Bees accountable and to also give them something for their work, right? So in my head, I'm just thinking that the Bees are going to end up becoming like influencers, right? And they will just do their thing and they will get rewarded on chain. So that's what we are doing. And lastly, I think I've been working aggressively with the ENF, but that's something that the ENF can talk about if deemed necessary. So that's about it.
Okay, cool. Lovejoy.
Hey guys. Yeah, deep in ENF world. That's been keeping me really busy. Apart from that, we've been having some, I think, interesting discussions in the community, which I think we'll touch on a little bit more later in this conversation about the shape of things going forward. And what else? I was going to touch on one other thing. Yeah, I'm still recovering. Just my cough won't go away, so I'm going to stay muted most of the time. That's not what I wanted to say. Damn. It'll come back to me. Yeah. I'll circle back around at some point. I'm sure I'll have more to add.
Okay, cool. John.
Yeah, Fractally it's taken majority of my focus. We're looking at the sort of token contract and the possibility of how that might be able to be updated, and got a lot of features out of that, and the broader scope of things. Yeah, that's about all I can say, I think. Yeah, other than that, yeah, just working that on Fractal stuff.
Is Violet Garden gonna be still its own thing? Will that still exist, or will that be sort of rolled up into Fractally and kind of go away?
Yeah, I think it will probably do some sort of merge. It's not finalized, but that's probably the way to do it, because you know there's just so much stuff from Fractally, so you can't really have two sort of separate things. So yeah, I'd say there'll be some sort of merge there.
Cool. Okay. Aaron, you're last.
Yep, I will try to keep this short. I'm fighting a headache, so I don't know how coherent I'll be. But account creation stuff's still underway. I feel like I say that every week. It's the concepts that we've actually learned from doing this process through Eden and whatever we think we can both apply to some of the stuff in the working group papers, which I'm going to be excited to kind of talk about. So on that side, the account creation may lead into some cool stuff, proposals that'll come out to even further extend what we had talked about. And on the flip side, like you were talking about earlier, Chris, the application of Eden processes to other things. I can think of a couple things in some of these papers that might be able to benefit from Eden processes. Like the paper will define a thing where it's like some sort of community leadership needs to exist. We don't know what it is. That's certainly going to be a point to, like, if that idea is warranted and we want this on the network, then we'll get into the details about governance, and being able to reapply these systems is certainly going to be a big win and use case for potentially what we have here. So I'm excited to be able to talk about that. In a few conversations recently, I've been like, I don't know why we're keeping the papers so secretive, but maybe that's just my default mode of operation, and there was no mandate to not talk about things. I don't know.
I think, yeah, well, one of the reasons that they go secret A is that they're constantly being updated. Like, many white papers look like one thing one day, and then a week later they're completely different, and then you realize, oh shit, that was a bad idea, or that isn't going to be as smooth as first thought. But people are going to see the first week's draft and be like, oh, Grey Mass want to do this, and ENF is doing that, and then
Go flip out.
And then like unthought out ideas that spread out, and then it's like, oh, hang on, yeah, that is a good idea. We're not going ahead of it, but the cat's out of the bag by that point. So I think that's one reason that they kind of it's one reason why they go public, because the crypto community can definitely be emotional sometimes.
Can't argue with you at all. It happens. You take one like innocuous little thing you've written, and suddenly it's like, oh, I didn't even think about that when I wrote that, but okay, that's not what I meant. But here's a firestorm. So I don't have too many updates. It's mostly paperwork, working group paperwork. I'm excited that the API paper's in like review right now. Translational hopefully begins soon. That'll be coming out in a couple weeks, and the wallet paper will be entering review. And then once that's done, I can stop writing every day, and I will be a more sane human, maybe. I don't know, but that's my update.
You're going to disappear, right? Because you're going to deserve a break after all this?
I am going to take a break after this. I've been working nonstop since like November at this point. So
yeah, well-deserved break for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, awesome. Well, great updates. So the next item on the agenda was to review basically bylaws. And the idea has come up a bit in the community about Eden not having really formalized bylaw drafts, essentially, and some misunderstandings of expectations. We're basically kind of waiting, kind of falling into the B1 trap, where we're kind of waiting for someone else to do something. So we're gonna go back to the principles of more equal animals and try to be as independent as possible, which means that there's no harm in us trying to at least come up with a framework or a start at bylaws. And if they don't go anywhere, that's fine. But as mentioned by Aaron and myself, there's other communities that are going to use what we're starting here and adopt it into their own community. So at a minimum, maybe some of these bylaws could at least be a template and useful for those. So I think there's still value in us working through it. So I'll share.
Yeah, and there's also a chance that Eden or Eden 1 or Eden will stay its own entity. We as Eden led by the chief delegates, are going to make a decision on whether to migrate into Fractally or not. And if the community decides not to, then we need some bylaws. And so Chris did a great job of starting this process of proposing some bylaws. So let's check it out.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, well, before we get, to sort of nitty gritty, like the point of Eden, like the sort of overall goal is it to essentially hand out, community funds and help the community, making EOS a better place, or is it to expand the community's power when it comes to governance?
I mean, it's an incomplete question, kind of. Like, I don't think it's an either or. There's probably a bunch of options. Those are two of them.
Yeah. Well, what is the answer to that then?
It could, well, we could have, like, if it's a multiple choice question, that could be A and B. C could be, are we going just expanding our own membership and creating a community that works together for our own self-interest? D could be, are we a community that's looking to expand into other ecosystems? Are we going to we could buy some land and start a commune? We could, I don't know. It seems like there's a lot we could do, is sort of my point.
Yeah. So which one is it that, Eden is about?
I don't know. I don't think we need
I don't think it's like relevant to pick one. It's just useful to think about these things. And, Dan had said that there's a possibility of staying independent. And also, like, we don't know about Fractally yet. The white paper still hasn't come out as of this recording. And so, like, yeah, it's still like a lot of unknown, but just interesting to kind of think about, I think.
Well, ironically, that's like the first point on this whole bylaw sheet, is the purpose of the foundation and organization. And so far, we don't have an answer included in the peace treaty, nor our own. So, and I'm not saying right now, the goal, by the way, isn't to like, hey guys, let's answer all this. I just want to show this to us, and are we missing some key items? And then I think we could take it away and individually, like I'm happy to start to plug in some potential answers just because I'm doing it anyway. But yeah, the goal is just to look at this, not to answer it. I'm going to close my door.
But John, so where were you going with that? What's your reasoning behind your question?
Well, yeah, like, what is the purpose of Eden?
Okay.
Other than fractal governance is cool. Let's do it because it's fun, kind of thing. Like, there was a lot of hype. Like, a lot of people just came because they wanted to try out this whole new fractal idea. But as fun as our method of elections are, like, what else? What is the goal here?
So Chris, if you see the other tab, there's a flow charts that Chris created, and he had a proposal of how.
Sure, that's a great segue. Yeah, let me bring up another sheet. Exactly, that's a great one. So this will, hold on, I've got my screen covered. One sec. There we go. So here's what EOS looks like currently in a snapshot. Can you guys see that, or is it showing the wrong thing?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So this first of all could be wrong. I'm only going off of what I know, and I don't know everything. So by all means, correct anything that you think jumps out. So I'll just quickly run through this to sort of explain it. Token holders, purple is like influence, essentially. Green is money. So token holders vote for block producers, stake weighted vote. Block producers set inflation. Here's the money coming into the system. 1% BP pay, 2% savings. Block producers do have the ability to perform God powers, and they can self-police. This is I was trying to look at the differences between Telos and EOS in terms of how it's set up, because it's such a good apples to apples comparison. So there is self-policing by block producers possible, but it's not really explicitly written in some sort of overarching document that I have found yet. So then if we go down, we've got the Eos Network Foundation. The block producers have appointed leadership there. They provide funding based on the request for funding. There is, Aaron corrected I misunderstood or kind of forgot about the EOS Foundation Advisory Board. We barely ever hear about that. But there was in one of the very first document that came out from the ENF, there's an advisory board. So how they were selected, I think it's more of an appointment as well by key stakeholders, it looks like. So they provide oversight and advice, and they advise the Eos Network Foundation. Then we've got us over here, Eden. We've been funded by the Eos Network Foundation. We give funding to chief delegates, and we elect prudent stewards of community funds. I think it's a pretty general statement of what we're doing. And then the ENF also does Pomelo via matching. So to token holders, working groups, they appoint and fund. ENF Ventures, just looking forward, like that's on the roadmap. So I just figured I'd throw it in here. Likely to fund that plus appoint, and then they do marketing as one of the big buckets on their quarterly report was marketing, essentially, brand development type of thing. So funding and appointing. Okay, so that's the current snapshot. Now here is a suggested, how could Eden be included in all that? So a little more busy. Token holders, same thing. They vote for block producers. Block producers set inflation. I just threw this here for kicks, but slightly reducing BP pay, slightly reducing amount of savings, and adding some directs just for fun. So they can still self-police, but you notice the God powers are gone. And so now I've suggested that the Eden community could have tied in much more closely with the block producers. So a relationship is formed where we can request funding directly from the block producers, because that has been suggested and encouraged. So they can fund us directly. The Eden election, this is small, but I'll read it. Eden's election selects salaried leaders. So we would all have like a small salary to have these roles, who deliberately direct our combined portion of funding. So instead of us having these individual budgets and we just do our own thing, we would have a salary and a combined budget that as a committee, might be a little slower, but as a committee, we would then direct funding to whatever cause that we would kind of decide to spend funding on. So it would almost select for leaders as opposed to projects in that respect. And then they would also, they would select leaders, they become the delegates. The chief delegates, anytime God powers are requested, they go through us. We would have like a single MSIG that could be basically a funnel to pass through God powers. And it doesn't have to be all God powers. Like technical breaks could be one thing, but stuff that's more like just, for example, inflation or things that are deliberated and community has back and forth dialogue, that could then filter through us as like this community checkpoint. We would also then appoint the executive director of the Eos Network Foundation as opposed to the block producers directly. And then this advisory board would have a collaborative relationship with Eden chief delegates, because we now have this sort of shared increased responsibility with managing the network, who still advise the Network Foundation, and the stuff at the bottom is the same. So in this layout, Eden and the chief delegates have far more influence as to the direction of the chain. So there's one example. Thoughts?
I think the God powers piece should still be next to the block producers, because like no matter what kind of governance structure that we have in place, it's, you know, he who runs the chain is gonna be, you know, God of it kind of thing.
Does it have to be that like that?
Yeah, I agree with John.
By definition.
No, I'm saying
almost.
like technically speaking, does it have to be like that?
Oh, like could it? I mean,
because the token holders, they have the most stake and the most to lose, right? So
it's not that. It's just, you know, the computers, like the nodes, like the nodes could potentially, if you had enough nodes, just ignore your requests and stuff like that. Like, you know, it's like in most cases, like, you know, we can delegate that power. Sure, we can delegate that power, but I don't think we should ever be under the illusion that something cannot happen without, you know, whoever's in charge, whether it's the ENF or you know, Eden. Technically, it can still always happen. There's still that layer of trust there in the block producers, and, you know, who runs the network there as well.
I think it's great that you did that, Chris. these visuals are always super helpful, and just like it's so much better to use this format to explain an idea, and I think it's really interesting. I think it makes a lot of sense, and yeah, good job.
Now, but what I don't get is if we have chief delegates or we have Eden members, right, and they are not the majority of the token holders, right, but they are having the God powers, then it's not fair to the people who actually has the most to lose if, let's say something was to happen to the network.
I think it's God powers is probably, it's just too broad. It's like, it's not like there's multiple aspects to those God powers. So I agree with you. Like, I think any technical issue that would come up, that's like, so you would have to kind of split out the God powers. And so maybe all Eden, we have input on inflation set points, or when the ENF is requesting funding, does that go through Eden to approve? Or stuff with vesting, like the B1 thing. This community could have had input on that. So it's basically like an oversight committee that can manage governance decisions beyond emergency technical changes.
So basically we should just have a seat at the table, pretty much.
It's just one of the MSIGs. Yeah, it's not like it. So the BP still do everything they do, except now it's 15 of 21 plus Eden CDs.
Got
or some things. I don't know. It doesn't have to be everything, but it's just like, it could just be some stuff.
So again, back to my question before is, one of the questions was, do we want to expand the governance powers of the community? So looking at this chart, that's what you want?
It's an option. Yeah, in general, I think so. Yeah, generally speaking, I think the stake-weighted Pareto capture of DPoS is just one form of Pareto it's just one. So if we can overlap things, so if we can add this other form of you can't capture this now. The whole point of Eden is that you can't capture it with Pareto. It's Pareto resistant. It has all these benefits of democracy. So if we can overlap these two now, we create a more resistant system and a more robust system.
John, without going into details that you may not be able to go into, is this kind of barking up the same tree that Fractally is headed towards with like the DAO of DAOs, in essence? Because I've saw comments I can't immediately quote off the top of my head from Dan recently, talking about the hybrid stake weighted democracy approach to governance, and this is kind of like a similar take in essence, but under the current mode of the way we can operate now under 1.0, which I totally appreciate, Chris. Really helpful to just visualize the possibilities.
Yeah, there isn't. I don't know. It's hard. There is and there isn't. Like it's like yes and no. But it's like 19 days now till the white paper for Fractally comes out. So yeah, not too much longer to wait before we can really dig into it and go deeper down. So yeah, perhaps we shouldn't go real deep in on this conversation, given that Fractally white papers around the corner, and because like that would just there'll be a whole lot more ideas thrown out and new methods of how we can decide governance, and then which parties do what and stuff like that, because like it says, it's DAOs, like you can have more communities doing more things in different ways with different relationships and stuff. Yeah,
I agree. It'll be a much more robust discussion once we read the white paper.
Yeah.
So
it's tricky as well, because it's like the chicken and egg problem. Like it'd be cool if we had more governance influence over the chain, but then we can't prove our experience with governance issue over the chain without governing the chain as well. So like the block producers won't be so keen on giving us too much power if we fail at handling it properly and stuff like that. And again, they're the ones that spent all the money to get that influence in the first place. So it's a big ask, sort of transferring that trust, some of it away anyway from Eve, and then putting it into Eden.
So Chris, I like the system that you have here, which like over time, right, there can be a balance, right? It's going to take time for Eden to actually become trustworthy and good enough to actually have a stake, right? So I understand we can balance this, but my question is, how do we elect the ENF person? How do we elect that person?
The idea there was, yeah, I would imagine we'd all just, Eve would end up still being the guy. Like, so the thought was we would seek candidates, people who would say, hey, I'd like to work and have that job. Eve would be one of them, and we would discuss and interview, and we would have an election basically and come to 2/3+1 ourselves to appoint whoever that is.
So that would be a problem. That would create a political system, a political party.
Well, normally that's how it works, though. So normally in organizations, you have a board. Like a board, they get to pick the CEO. Like that's normally how it works. What we're doing actually in EOS is actually abnormal in a traditional business sense, where if Eden, and the other thing to keep in mind is if this was the state of Eden, I'd expect a lot of other people who didn't participate in the first election would participate in this election. That's the other thing, right? If you knew that the end of the rainbow was people who actually were going to have true political influence in terms of deciding the direction of this chain, I expect we'd see a lot more people step up to try to participate is one thing. The one thing I think would be interesting, though, is the people who do make it to the chief delegates, none of those people could be appoint themselves essentially to be the executive director.
So my thing is, why is it that there cannot be an algorithm that can actually pick out of those people, pick whoever that's going to be in as the ENF, so that there's no human biases in play? That there's a bunch of people who make it to the chief delegation, and the chief delegation, out of that, there will be a random pick of one of those people to represent the network. Or maybe it can be a couple of people, not just one person.
Can I throw an idea out there?
Yeah.
One of the main roadblocks I see to this model as it stands is that Eden 1.0 is dominated by the English-speaking community. And I think this brings us back to the need for a democracy of democracies. And so perhaps if Eden 1.0 multiplied by however many communities worldwide, each set of chief delegates from those respective organizations appointed a candidate to lead the ENF, and then all those candidates went into like a pool to be considered by like the entire, like a global consortium of, so you'd have more like a United Nations kind of like scale thing. Whereas unfortunately, I think the only thing we could hope to achieve right now, well, just given the current like architecture of things with 1.0 being so English focused, it's like we would inevitably just, put one of, it's like we've kind of already done what this would achieve in a sense. I know what you mean though, that it would expand the political power to like it would complete the loop. It would complete like the circuit almost of political power and the reason for elections. It would kind of give us a reason for being that we don't currently have. But I think in order for it to really be robust, it needs to be like a network almost, like this needs to be one node in a giant network. Otherwise,
yeah. So basically, every DAO has to be an Eden. All the communities. So EOS support is supposed to be using Eden process. The Bs are supposed to be using Eden process, maybe a little bit tweaked somehow. Then we elect a representative, and that representative will come to maybe a consortium of things, and then maybe an algorithm can pick 10 of those people, and out of the 10 of those people, they will sit at the table to discuss what is happening to the network and work with the BPs, pretty much. Right?
It's a bit like, yeah, I think Fractally, it's seeming a lot like Fractally is headed that way. And it's a bit like sociocracy. It's a bit like the way the Zapatista is organized, where you've got community councils that all send representatives to like a central body, and then they deliberate, and they send people back to the community to like relay what took place at that central deliberative body. And then they have this like reciprocal sort of spoken hub sort of relationship. And I feel like that's what we're headed towards, the fractal concept, but I haven't read the white paper, so I can't really say.
Me neither. But I think the concern with Fractally is that it seems to head to mass appeal. And with a model like this that we're talking about Eden filling, mass appeal doesn't work. You need specific people to be a part of that, like are in Eden and being elected to be interested in this thing. Whereas if we took Eden and tried to just make everybody part of Eden, like it wouldn't be effective as an element of the system like we're looking at in the diagram. So I think that is potentially a really strong reason that both of these systems do need to continue to exist, is because I don't see how Fractally fits into this diagram at this moment. But I could see how in Eden of Edens, like was the original idea when we're talking about Chinese and Korean and like all these different language speakings, like creating a pyramid of Edens, that kind of fits into this diagram. But when it's everybody, when you're trying to get your local town into the system and you're like all these various groups that really don't care about EOS at all, if the leadership structure boils out of that, then it's going to be convoluted. It's no longer EdenOnEOS, a process specific to EOS. It is now an app that everybody just wants to use to earn money and do other things.
Yeah.
So,
but don't you think there's kind of like, again, like I have no idea because I haven't read the white paper, but couldn't there be like kind of a level of opt-in-ness to, like, say we had a union of unions and we had fishermen over here and knitters over there and songwriters over there, and maybe some of them have no interest in governance, but they're all banded together and their fates are kind of tied together through like a common exchange medium, i.e. EOS. And certain members within those communities, if they reach a sufficient size, are going to be interested in the fate of the network, or that stuff, governance and whatnot, and they could opt in, or they could say, hey, we should have a seat at the table. We're like a big community, and the fate of this whole network kind of affects us. Like we ought to have a seat, and then they could opt in to participate in a greater sort of governance process. But I know what you mean. Like if it's just a bunch of small communities that don't amount to a whole lot of, I mean, if it's just like a real niche sort of like, I don't want to pick on any interest groups that might not be, but yeah.
No, I mean,
I see your point.
I'm trying to draw your analogy out further. And like, if there's fishermen and lumberjack and all these unions and or whatever, if they get to a certain side, do they deserve like political power in the government of the country that they're within? I don't think so. They might want to like lobby for things or whatever, but they don't get a seat at the table when bills are being drafted. Like that's the difference for me.
Well,
like Eden feels like a process that is for governance and defining and power and structure and decision making. And the way that Fractally is going is now more of an economic and organizational engine, but it is no longer governance. So, I mean, I'm speaking
Maybe
from a lack of knowledge.
Yeah,
exactly. But from like what little hints I've heard, it's meant to be more mass appeal. It's meant to pull people in. It's meant to incentivize people to participate, which skews and misaligns interests. Like, I don't see how Fractally fits into a diagram like this.
It could just cast a wider net, though. You know, it's like a wider net from which to draw more people that are interested in governance, you know, so you could look at it that way too.
So I think this brings up the point why, we are doing this, right? That we need Eden to be Eden. And for you to join that governance program, you have to have a skin in the game. You pay your dues, you come in, go through the process, be a good person. Your reputation is at stake, right? And then people meet up, pick who they want to represent them, get a budget, use that budget to perform an activity for the community or the group of people that voted you in, right?
Well,
so I think we can have a DAC or a DAP, but even with that, you still need like a governance body. And I think this process helps you pick individuals that can help.
I think what you just described should move to Fractally, though. I think that if you are seeking funding for a project, you should go to Fractally, and Eden should probably start focusing more on governance. This model here has fixed salaries for the people to participate in the leadership, so that way they don't need their budget for their products. Like, your goal of being a part of something like this, at least the way I'm interpreting it, is that you are an official acting in this new Pareto distribution. You're not seeking funding.
I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it like this. You are not taking the budget to go build your own project. You are taking the budget to use the budget to work for the community, right? So you are given a budget, and then you take that budget and you distribute that budget to build the things that the community needs, because the community is trusting you that you will do those kind of things.
Yeah, that's what we did this time. But the idea in this suggestion is that that's not actually, that you're not solving for people who are trying to spend money. You're solving for people who can be trusted to have influence over governance of the chain. And they get compensated with a small salary. So they show up at meetings and talk to block producers and stay involved with governance decisions like inflation changes and whatever. But it's not necessarily, in this example, about spending money for projects. That's the whole point, right? Where we kind of be more specific.
That's kind of like the point of Fractally, it seems, is giving people money to do things. And if both are going to run in parallel, we don't need two systems that are somewhat identical, that the only purpose is to give people money for what they think is valuable.
Gotcha.
So I don't know, it's all up in the air. I do think, kind of coming all the way back before we went down this rabbit hole, like this system would be really hard to implement, just because like it has to really prove itself. Like the Eden of Edens would have to exist, and showing that it's effective to be able to gain the power, to be able to influence the change in the network this way and effectively move a little bit away from DPoS. And we're not going to be able to prove that that happens unless Eden iterates and grows on its own and is not replaced, which we need funding for and development for. And like, if we 100% were like, yeah, we want this Eden process to be a new like leg of governance, then like our entire budgets should all be going into ensuring that this system is developed, is expanded, is rolled out to the other communities, facilitates growth, like for those who are interested and wanted to participate. It would have to not be about our projects anymore, because we lost our development team, essentially.
In terms of pragmatically, in terms of this and the BPs accepting, bottom line, they would always have to approve, because if say somehow there's a code change that says inflation changes need to go through 15 to 21 plus an Eden CD MSIG, they could just undo that, right? 15 to 21 could be like, nah, we don't like who you've just elected. We're totally crossing that off. We're going back to how it is currently, right? They could always do that. So it's almost like a peace treaty would exist between the BPs and this Eden, where it's like, we're just going to do a gentleman's handshake. They're going to make the change so that now we have authority, but they could always undo it if they so felt. Is that Does that sound accurate?
I think that's the only way to technically do it now, is it would just have to be an agreement that this was a process, because at the system level, block producers, once they reach quorum, can do whatever they want to do. The technical solving that at a technical level would be a big undertaking. That would require a lot of hours to rework how EOS.io works to actually add that check and balance at the system level. So a friendly agreement that is in place, like a lot of what Telos does, is just, it is the agreement. It's not codified into the system contract. This is an agreement that when you jump on, if this happens, like this is going to happen. And then that's just up to the people who are block producers to enforce. It's an agreement. That's not a smart contract. Smart contract.
That's what I was thinking a long time ago, is the idea of it. We just need a new peace treaty. I think way back when we had that the SX Vault hack, and I had written the thing, I put it up on the community, on the forums, and it was the idea of, let's just have a peace treaty between the BPs. And I think it was kind of like this, where the God powers would go through a committee of Eden members. Yeah, fuck, I totally forgot about that. I basically wrote about that then. But it was all about just a gentleman's handshake. It wasn't really codified. It was just, let's just agree to do it this way because it's better. Like arguably better, but it gives this idea of fairness in terms of access to God powers, where at least it's just not arbitrary and kind of, best.
Yeah, there's some working groups focusing on that too.
Does the EOS Foundation Advisory Board have any influence, or are they simply just providing advice?
It's kind
advice.
It's double-edged. We are providing advice, but you have to keep in mind that the board is also made up of block producers. So if the ENF goes way off script and starts doing crazy stuff, you have the block producers right there with knowledge that can just cut funding. And then the ENF doesn't have funding anymore. So it's the BPs, and I guess that's also worth noting is that the grants account and the EOS.io savings account, like the BPs own those. They could just take the money out. So anything that, like, funding could be cut off at any moment based on the advice of the advisory board.
So so it's like BP's on top on a technical level, and then it's delegated back down to the ENF, and then under the ENF is the advisory board, and then the advisory board still has BP influence there.
And I mean, arguably in that same structure, Eden kind of has representation there because I am on the board. So like if we talked about things.
I was going to say, would it be simpler if we just replaced the ENF advisory board with Eden itself, and then that's our gentleman's agreement, or
potentially,
or before actions are made by the ENF, they are run by Eden, and then Eden can just say yay or nay, regardless of what we say. It can still go, but it'll be on record as to what our thing is, and we would be given the opportunity before, the opportunity to say yes or no to within 48 hours or whatever before it's actually, triggered, approved by the ENF, and then, approved by the block producers.
The way it came out, so in the very first coming out Medium article, description of the board was, this board will be responsible for reviewing the grant and sponsorship proposals brought forth by the core, as well as providing it with critical feedback and overall direction. Although the final decisions and on-chain authority remain with the foundation core, the board will serve as an overarching oversight function to ensure stakeholder accountability is present. So this is really, they're really just here there's no authority.
And stakeholders being the block producers.
Yeah.
But also, like, I can't comment on how it's done, but like, I don't see why Eden 1.0 should be considered to have more weight than a potential fractally based DAO. Just given the way, or just given the way that governance is structured on Fractally, I think it makes more sense, and there's better checks and balances in the Fractally system than what we have in Eden today, as well.
You have quite the insider knowledge, though. So
yeah, I know. Like You know, it just
Yeah.
means can't go too far down this rabbit hole again without reading the white paper.
I mean, but like,
you know, yeah.
I'm just glancing over rules of relative power and coupling in encapsulation here on Dan's book, More Equal Animals, and I'm like, it pretty much lays out kind of what fractally might be organized like, if you think about it.
Well, yeah.
Like the hold on, I gotta find my notes here again. The lesson we can take from this is that democracy only works among relatively independent equals and only at a small scale. If we want to build larger democratic systems, then they must be constructed to respect the law of relative power. And then it goes into, it is possible for people to reach consensus within their county. This is coupling and encapsulation. And that consensus gives everyone in the county more power. Their county has far more power to negotiate with the state as a united front of 50,000 co-located people than if 50,000 uncoordinated people wanted to achieve the same influence. He said something else in here. A democracy of states should know nothing about the composition of the states. From a computer science perspective, the fact that states are composed of counties and that counties are composed of towns, which are composed of people, is an implementation detail. At a federal level, the peace treaty is a democracy of states where each state is an equal. Each state is an equal. So I'm just thinking, yeah, we can't, like, you can't have like one DAC to rule them all. You kind of have to have a federation, or I don't know if federation is the right word, but a democracy of DACs that each has relative power in the system.
And each DAC has their own relationship with each other DAC as well. Like, it's a spider web of relationships. It's not so hierarchical all the time as well. And then, you know, all the complexities on that, and then that's what forms into Fractally. So
yeah, so that's the DeFi system, right? Like trading their own tokens. That's the web of the relationships, I think, that he's describing.
So the thing is, it's not about you know, having that fractal systems, right? It's about the fact that you pay someone to join, or the person is actually volunteering or having a stake in the game. Because if we're paying people to just join the community, there's going to be a lot of people and they don't have any incentives. They just join because they're getting money, and they will just join the community. But can you use that system to elect leaders who care enough? That's where the problem is.
The incentive becomes just to make money.
Yeah.
Which is what we saw on Steam. So
that's where the core problem is. You know, the skin in the game and moral hazards are two of the most critical things when you are building a community and a business. Because when you have a business where individuals are basically feeding or maybe taking advantage of the business, they don't care, right? You give the credit card to the person, they're just spending the money on things that they cannot afford because the money doesn't belong to them, right? They're spending it on the company, right? And if that person also does not have a stake in the game, that they are not going to lose anything, then they will go wild, right? Because there'll be no responsibility. So I think those two things are the things that we have to factor into this if we are trying to elect leaders who care enough about the system that they will do whatever it takes to protect the system.
I don't quite understand how you guys arrived at the conclusion that in Fractally it would operate so differently from the way Eden now operates, where you still have your reputation on the line, you still are part of a small community that other people will judge you for your actions, and the further you go and the more, you know, kind of you pay it forward with your contributions to the community that other people can verify, the further rounds you would get to in an election, and the more budget you would preside over for that week, I guess. And it seems like all the incentives are aligned. It doesn't seem like a money-making game to me, because if it was played like a money-making game, the people playing it that way, I think, would lose pretty quickly. So, and maybe the community would just dissolve. So if there's a community that actually wants to get together and do whatever, you know, theoretically they have some reason for being and existing, whatever that is. And maybe they're, you know, you can imagine the initial composition of EOS, you know, if Fractal launches on EOS, which it shall, I think, then it's all EOS communities anyway that are the initial adopters of it. So it's like you've got a global network of EOS based communities or people that have some sort of working relationship to people that work with EOS, and it proceeds from there. But it could be people that are like, I like origami. We're like an origami club. I mean,
I think it's,
I just think
if there's weekly elections, there's no way you're selecting for leaders. Like there's no way during, and that, again, we haven't seen it. So perhaps there's longer duration leadership.
Isn't that the process though? Like
Well,
who
it
bubbles
happens
up to
every
the
week.
top,
You have-
like week after week?
Yeah, I guess if you remember, how are you going to come up with bylaws? Like, okay, so we have this bylaw template that we can start to fill out. You got 1 week, and then you might be out because the next election's coming, and you may not.
So I had tweeted something to EOSP's Twitter. I screenshotted a message from Dan in Telegram that he said there was going to be 12 people that are like chief delegates in Eden 1. So I think that there are parts of the system that are just not known, haven't been announced yet.
Yeah, there's some equivalent that's been hinted at to preserve some sort of leadership in the system. Yeah, it's hard to talk about without knowing, but it is funny to me that
Well, John just said yeah, so yeah, we're good.
It's funny to me that the guy that wrote, you know, like More Equal Animals, that goes into moral hazard and skin in the game and all this stuff,
Yeah,
like, would omit,
Would
like,
leave it out.
oh, oops, like I
I'm
forgot
just going
about that
by
part.
what I heard,
Yeah.
right? So based on
Yeah.
the stuff that we have on Telegram, right? It seemed like people are going to get paid to join the community, right? So if people are getting paid to join the community, what are the incentives for them to join the community if they have nothing on the line? That's what I'm saying. Like,
I don't think it's fruitful speculating on what it can and can't be, or what it's going to cover and what it's not going to cover, and how it's going to compare to ours and how it's not. When
Let's just can we move on?
Okay. Oh, we can do. Let's just go back to this one thing as a high level, and then we can pretty much end, or we'll keep talking, of course, but just to complete this topic of these bylaws. I've shared this with the group. After this call, I'm going to share this with the Eden members. I'll share both those images plus this with everybody, because it was just people were talking about it, and I think some people can take this and start to fill out answers. What do they think? Like, what could, just leave this to anybody. Go ahead, fill it out. What do you think? Membership removal procedure. We don't, right? Dispute resolution has been, the powers of dispute resolution. Both of those have been hinted at via a Medium article by Dan, but not really integrated. Our board seats right now, again, some of these don't apply. Some of these are just generally applicable to just boards and foundations, so they don't all apply. Board position tenure, that doesn't fit because it's based on elections for us. Election procedures straight from the peace treaty. Frequency, removals of ourselves by, like, we could, in some boards you could remove board members.
Do you have a voluntary, like anything to trigger a new election, like a vote of no confidence or anything like that? Like, or what if all the CDs just wanted to step down simultaneously, and they're like, "Fuck this"? Like,
So
is there
there's
a way to call a new resignation of board members? Cool.
Filling board member vacancies, meeting schedule,
Cool.
members, conflict of interest, committees and working groups, public record keeping.
That's great.
so I have another thing.
Snap elections, though. I don't see snap elections. I think that's a good one that is missing.
So Chris, since we are trying to come up with a formation of an organization for the CDs, can we use some parts of this? And yeah, we can use that for the Chief Delegate organization, because we're still working on that, right?
Yeah, so I could give we should just quickly say that the law firm that that was hired with the help of the ENF has created a memorandum analysis for us. They went through 4 different entity types that we could consider, the pros and cons of each. We will be discussing that in next week's call.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we are not coming up with bylaws for Eden. We are coming up with some sort of a structure for the chief delegations organization. So we can do that. And then in the future, if we have to add more to it, then we add more to it.
Wait, so what's the chief delegate organization? What is that?
It's an organization that a group of chief delegates like us could form to make it easier for us to get funded for various things and to protect against other legal liabilities.
Do we intend on doing that?
Yeah.
I don't think so, but I think it's just worth going through the research for perhaps the next round of chief delegates, or like maybe the 12 chief delegates of Fractally.
Well, here's one cool side effect that I think Chris alluded to earlier, which is, and Chris is actively working on taking this structure that exists now and bringing it to other places, like both, as you alluded to, the work maybe with Telos, but then also on the ground, there's the what's the name of that organization again? That
it hasn't been disclosed yet.
Oh, okay.
But there's a DAO it's a controlled membership of 64 people. It's very different than ours, but it's used the process.
But anyway, my point was just that whether, even if we transition and go to Fractally and this is no more like as Eden per se, the model is pretty interesting and could be used outside of because like Fractally kind of depends on a big system that has many, is capable of federating all these different organizations all over the world. But say you had a group in a small town and you were cut off from the internet and you just wanted to organize, this is a cool way of doing it. So, I think it's worthwhile, as much as I do kind of think we're going to end up moving to Fractally. I think it's still worthwhile figuring out what this is in its own right, I guess.
But Brandon, we already spent the money. We spent some dollars to go through this. What's wrong with us organization? Let's form it.
No,
form the organization.
Let's form it.
Well, we proceeded with paying the money to learn about it for the community.
Yes,
that was a logic. That was the reason I said yes. I didn't say let's give it. Well, let's say yes, and then form an organization out of it with an undefined, scope that we still haven't figured out several months into this process.
Don't you have enough on your plate already, Randall? I can't wait to form another organization.
My thing is, I feel like we've done so much to get to this that we must as well just do something. Let's do something. If John is willing to build a website, I'm willing to fund it. Let's build a website. Let's do something.
I think we should.
I feel like we should do less. I feel like we're doing too much. I feel like if we doing less is more at this stage. Focus. Stay in our lanes, right? Like Aaron has got enough work on Grey Mass. Chris has got enough stuff with Telos. I've got Fractally stuff. Like we can't. Right. We're like children in a candy shop, and we're looking. We're getting every single lolly or what candy you call it candy. Like
candy.
we can't have it all. I feel like if you try to please everyone, you're just going to piss everyone off.
But April 9th, right? April 9th, what are we going to say to the new chief delegates who are coming?
Here's the
upgrade to Fractally. Upgrade to Fractally because it's been hard forked. and
no, but then we're not giving people the option. You still have to give the community.
No, Fractally, I feel like it's not going to be ready. Like,
it's not
the white paper. But no, so what we're going to say to the next chief delegates is, here's the research. Like, if you guys want to form, I think the next chief delegates are going to be in a much better position to form an entity than us, because most of us have entered into other commitments that we cannot form a legal entity. But this is for the next round. We're like the founding fathers or whatever. Like,
But we can
we got to
form it
provide
and
them
they
some
come
guidance.
into it, Jesse. We can form it and they come into it. They don't have to come and
Possibly.
form it.
You
Possibly.
should form a legal entity and fill it with personal assistants that can
Yeah.
instantly come to the aid of the next chief delegates and help them with whatever they need.
Yep.
I think that
I
would
agree.
be, and help us along the way. Aaron, I think, needs like 12 personal assistants. I'll take
Something like
I'll
that.
take 2.
Like
And,
craft.
No, we just need security guards for Aaron so he can never leave his house. He just has to completely code for
I don't
us
think
all
you
day,
need
every day.
guards for that.
Just in case you get the idea.
Have you seen his cats?
Oh, they're not to protect me. They're to keep me here.
All right, they're your jailers.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
But Chris,
I'm-
what you have is I think it's nice. It's very good, and maybe we should just just play around with it and go from there. I mean, there's nothing wrong with us doing that. We're not losing anything.
Yep, that was the point. It's just discussion, and people can take it or leave it, and there's no harm, right? I mean, and there's no expectation either that all 6 of us should spend hours looking at this. I'm going to because I want to, and it overlaps with other things I'm doing. But to each their own.
Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen on the election April 9th. I'm slightly concerned that nobody's going to care and nobody's going to want to participate. Just being brutally honest, like, why would you want to go through this process if this process is going away? And if this organization is going away? It's funding in the short term, which is great, but it's not, it's going to be very different than I think what we tried to do. I don't think that I think if people run on April 9th, it's going to be to fund their individual projects, and they're not going to think twice about what Eden could do from a governance perspective, unless it turns out that Fractally just can't do it. But we don't know yet. And so I guess that goes back to the organization, and it's like, we could put money into an organization and have it ready on April 9th. But with how quickly everything keeps changing, is that organization even going to be useful to them? Are they even going to try to do the things that we're trying to do?
it was personal assistants. They'll do whatever you ask them to do. So it's like Swiss Army knife. Just make a Swiss Army knife. I'm half joking.
Good point, though. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
Like we'll know a lot more by then. We'll know what Fractally looks like. We'll know the roadmap of when it'll be rolled out. We'll have more progress on this bylaw thing and the discussion amongst the community. Like the other thing that hopefully this does is it creates more talking. Like what can we become?
Yeah.
Let's brainstorm, and maybe more people become invigorated and wanting to do something with this, especially with the announcement of Fractally. And maybe that won't satisfy some people's desires of what they saw or what the potentiality they see of all this. So
here's an idea. Why don't we produce a manifesto based on our experience and circulate it to every city council in the United States or in our respective area, like a little white paper pamphlet, like how to run your own fractal democracy, and then just mail it to every single city council across the country and see what happens. Just planting seeds. Send a copy of More Equal Animals while we're at it. And like, good luck. If you liked this, you'll love Fractally. I don't know.
If you liked this, make sure you build the software to run it.
No, it's like deck of playing cards territory there.
oh yeah, that's an interesting one I could talk. So okay, yeah, this is interestingly, I had a conversation with I don't know if should I say his name. I don't want to say his name. Anyway, he's a guy in the community. He does some charity work. And so I'm going to help him with a bit of a kind of white paper on doing a manual election. We talked about this before, but doing like basically a donation to a community. The community runs their own internal deck of cards election, and whoever comes out of the top gets the money to deploy it within their community. So it's that whole philanthropic approach to using this process. Forgot about that. Yeah, that's on my list to do for next week.
Totally. I mean, like something like that's such a cool outcome, I think, even if it has nothing to do with EOS necessarily. I mean, we could like make a breadcrumb trail back to EOS, but
This does, because it's in Venezuela, so it actually is totally tied
cool.
to them and their use of EOS's currency.
mm-hmm. Sweet.
Anywho, anything else we want to jibber jabber
That was
over?
a lot.
Are we good?
I have just something funny come across my desk. I'm not complaining, just saying the bees can be more cool. Guys, are we not cool?
Getting grief
I
for
mean,
not being cool enough.
nerds are cool, aren't they? Yeah, I've seen some funny comments.
Someone should open up that link that I put in the chat.
Okay, I'm gonna do it.
And someone,
And what? And then what, John? Is it gonna like download malware?
we'll share the screen and let Chris narrate. Chris is good at narrating.
I'll read it.
Or we could just read it. Yeah.
Are you gonna show your screen, Chris?
I recently acquired 80,000 ETH for a very, very good price, and now I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Any help? Sorry, going to read it? I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, keep
Yeah,
going.
read it.
Yesterday, I was doing some good old arbitrage trading between Solana and Ethereum, and I managed to get my hands on 80,000 ETH for a really low price. So low, in fact, that you wouldn't believe me if I told you how I pulled off this deal. Now, I don't know what to do with all this ETH. It's worth approximately $250 million USD, which is not bad if you ask me. Should I stake it and get the 4% rewards? This way, I could get passive income, something like $10 million USD a year, which is theoretically enough for my family to live a comfortable life. Also, by staking, I would be contributing to the security of the blockchain, which is a big thing for me. I want to do my part. But is this the best course of action for me? I also thought about getting into liquidity pools, but I'm afraid of smart contract risk. All my ETH into an LP on Solana, and then some asshole comes and drains the contract. I worked very hard for this ETH. Oh, it sucked. And there's also the risk of impermanent loss. What if my ETH on Solana decoupled from ETH on mainnet? Anyway, thanks everyone. I look forward to read your ideas.
That's brilliant.
Lovely.
That's brilliant.
Sweet
I
deal.
get a kick-
80,000 Ethereum. Damn.
Yeah.
Get a kick out of you pronouncing it F, by the way.
Yeah. Very nice. On that note,
Well, I hope everyone has their homework for next week. You got to figure out what this guy is supposed to do with this 80,000 ETH. Come up with new bylaws for Eden and
Read
share
the
your-
legal memorandum.
Well, that's yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking more for like
Yeah.
outwardly.
So if
but-
we are going to read that, then we have to form the organization for
What is it like? One of those things. It's like once you start reading it, you're just bound to like. Yeah, it's like Rocco's Basilisk or something. Oh shit! I shouldn't
But
have
you know
said
something though,
I was just
about
thinking the same thing.
that.
like if let's say we have fractal DAOs and we elect leaders from these DAOs, don't they have to like be in like an organization as chief delegation, and then if they even move on up, have to be in an organization of the ENF?
Wait, say that again.
So so let's say you have DAOs, a bunch of DAOs, right?
Uh-huh.
And each DAO has like one vote. So you are electing like a member from that DAO to represent that community. These DAOs can also have an election and elect, let's say, a consortium of chief delegates, right? And they have to be like a chief delegate organization like we are right now. Don't
But
they?
comprised of all these different
Yeah,
communities.
all these different DAOs.
Yeah, but you wouldn't give each DAO one vote.
Well, just
I'm
go with
saying
it for
one
now. Just go with
representation,
it.
like a representative. Sorry, that's what I meant. A representative,
It would depend on
right?
scale, probably, but
It depends on scale, possibly, maybe, right? Let's say if it does, but still, don't you need like an organization for them to be in, so that they can get funds and use those funds to do whatever that they want to use it to do. Like
I feel like this is the question we've been asking since day one.
So no matter what, because they are going to be like the ENF. The ENF is technically also going to be a DAO, and that ENF has already created an organization where there's a way for you to spend the money, take the money, and redistribute that money. So if you have a bunch of guys who are going to be in an organization like we are right now, and they cannot transfer the money, then what the hell is the point?
Yeah, it's going to be up to every DAO to figure out. You're right. I think this problem doesn't go away anytime soon, no matter how you slice. You
still need a non-profit organization to form so that you can work with the real world, or else it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's limiting.
It's that or revolution, Randall. Those are your two options.
Just join a truck convoy, break the rules.
Yeah. You see this happening with the EOS Plus group right now, and those meetings, like just to talk about the need of an organization for these groups to come together to be able to do joint things and for people to be able to contribute to that organization. So yeah, there are needs, and by publishing this opinion type thing, we can determine or help people determine how they create those organizations. I mean, for us to create one at this point, we'd have to justify somehow. I mean, we're figuring out ways around not having a shared budget. We're at the end of, not the end, the last quarter of our term, essentially. So, I don't know, I'm rambling. I mentioned I was going to ramble today.
We're only two months away, right? So this is, we're winding down.
There's another question I have for John. So John, you brought up a point that based on the DAO, right, then maybe the amount of representative is going to increase or decrease, right? Is that what you were alluding to? Like, they cannot have
well, DAOs are a group of people, right? Not every person is equal. If it was a DAO full of, Aarons, then I would give it more weight than, another DAO where it's just fanboys or, something like that. Same thing with, language. Like, are you going to give the Chinese language the same weight as the Fijian language? Probably not. So there's all different ways.
Well, I'm perhaps uniquely qualified to answer that. We do it by GDP per capita and Bitcoin search rankings and Google Trends.
But how are you going to? Who is going to determine that? That's my question.
Let's
say big melee, big fight to determine.
A lot of that will be answered in the Fractal white paper.
All right, man. This white paper, man, I cannot wait for it.
It's going to be 600 pages long.
It'll just be like all the answers to everything. It should be like it'll be like a new Douglas Adams book. Turns out.
The end of it all.
I hope to see some really sweet mural boards.
John, can you drop some alpha and tell us how many pages the white paper is?
I don't know. Actually, I haven't even read it lately. It just updates so much. It's hard to keep up with. But we should probably schedule in a call day of release. I think it's about 5:22 Eastern Standard. Technically, we could read it together and sort of get our thoughts together as well. Especially if I've read it before, I could answer questions or like clarify anything that you guys might have if you wanted.
Yeah, for sure.
If we're gonna do that, we have to form the organization.
That's it. I'm not going to read it. If that's.
All right.
I'm going to just go join the Amish. I think they already figured this out.
Thanks for everyone's time. I'll see you guys next week.
All righty.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Take care. You guys.
Good.